Shahid Butt, who is a former foreign fighter. We're going to be talking a little bit about how people are recruited and radicalized to fight abroad. Shahid's experience is specific to the UK, where he's lived and grown up, and was himself left to go to Bosnia and Afghanistan. Shahid, I wanted to ask you first of all, we have to test your microphone in a minute. When you came back from Bosnia and you decided to go to Afghanistan, can you tell us a little bit about how you were recruited and what also were the drivers that made you feel that you wanted to go to Afghanistan at that point in time?
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Peace be upon you all. It's quite a long answer for such a small question. We don't have time to go into all the details. I grew up in a time in the 70s and the 80s in the UK where we suffered a lot of racism. There was a lot of, because of the color of my skin. As a consequence of that, I was very absorbed in the whole sort of fighting against racism through gangs and using violence. And because of that, I got involved in a lot of criminality. And criminality led to prison, where I spent quite a bit of time. When we talk about the drivers and we talk about what actually makes people want to do things like this, there's a lot of factors involved. And for me personally, I wasn't actually radicalized as a young person. I was probably somebody who was abused verbally and racially as a young person, but I wasn't radicalized as such as we see now today. For me, the driving factor was the fact that I saw the suffering of fellow Muslims around the world, and at that time for me it was Bosnia, and I felt that I had to do something about it. And for me, the only thing that I could do at the time was to go as an aid worker, which is what I did. I took myself and a group of other people, we went to Bosnia by road. We took food and medicine to Bosnia. But when I got to Bosnia, and after giving out all the food and medicine and the aid, when I saw the situation there, when I spoke to the people, when I heard about their stories, when I saw the atrocities that were taking place, for those of you that might not be too aware, at that time Bosnia, which was a predominantly Muslim country, was being ethnically cleansed by Christian fundamentalist Serbs. When I saw what was going on, when I heard what was happening, it kind of overwhelmed me, and so I almost felt compelled to do more than just give food and aid. And that's when I sort of made a decision to stay in Bosnia. I joined the Foreign Fighters Brigade of the Bosnian Army. They had a Mujahideen wing, and I was in Bosnia for several years. And during that time, from 92 until 98, I also traveled to Afghanistan and to Kashmir as well.
So Shahid, when you came back from Bosnia and you decided to go to Afghanistan, how did you make that journey? What did you have to do to make yourself known, or to recruiters, or did they come to you? How did that process happen?
Well, in the 90s, it wasn't like it is now. Now, you know, things have changed quite a lot. You have social media, you have the internet. During my time, that wasn't the case. As I was discussing earlier, when I wanted to go to Afghanistan to further my training, I didn't really know what to do or where to go. I sort of spoke to family and friends. It was only because when I was in Pakistan, I was sort of introduced to some people from an organization called Jamaat Islami, who were working with, in Pakistan, specifically the Kashmir issue. And they had training camps in Afghanistan. So through them, I got connected, and then that's how I actually ended up in Afghanistan.
So now you work with young people, trying to prevent them from getting involved with groups like Islamic State, so-called Islamic State. How has that recruitment changed in the time since you were trying to become a foreign fighter in the 90s? How does that happen now with the people who you're working with? How are they reading about, how are they being influenced by information that makes them think that they might want to join an extremist group?
First of all, off the bat, let me just make it clear that Islamic State, I don't even like actually using that terminology for them, but ISIS or whatever you want to call them, Daesh or whatever they are, these people are basically a group of criminals and barbarians, because when you look at the acts that they do, they have no relevance to Islam. It's an absolute oxymoron to equate what they do to Islam, because Islam is not a religion of violence and anger and terrorism, as everybody always seems to be sort of promoting all the time. Just because a few people claim to be Muslims doesn't mean that they represent all of the 1.5 billion Muslims around the world. And I sometimes get a little bit upset with the kind of labels and the kind of terminology that is used, because when we talk about extremism, and these words were mentioned today, the only religious mention was Islam, as if terrorism and extremism is exclusive to Muslims. Well, that's not the case, and I'm sure all of you people here are more than intelligent enough to know that. I don't need to go into, you know, the extremism and the violence that we see in places like in Burma, in Kashmir, and even in Europe as well. We see the rise of the far right, which are predominantly Christian white Europeans who are, you know, more dangerous. If you look at the reports and statistics around the world, especially in America, white Christian men are the biggest threat to Americans, not brown Muslim men. And, you know, sometimes I think in the whole sort of, you know, discourse and dialogue, we kind of get a bit sort of, we have these blinkers put on us as if Islam is the main cause, or Muslims. And I'm not saying that that's what we've been saying here, but just that internationally is what I seem to feel. And I get very sort of, obviously I'm a Muslim, so I'm going to be slightly defensive. But at the same time, I'm sure you'll understand that that's not the case. And we need to be very careful. And also labeling countries and races is also, you know, not very helpful as well.
Shahid, if I can just jump in. But this kind of discrimination now against Muslims has also become a driver in some ways, hasn't it? This discrimination that young Muslims feel. Is this something that you find with the groups that you're working with?
I mean, in the UK where I live, I do a lot of work with young people. Predominantly, 80% of my work is with young people, because I understand the drivers and I understand the complexities. I was one of those young, angry men myself. I felt that it was a me against the world. Everybody hated me. I had no prospects. I had no qualifications. I was kicked out of school. So I understand that. I've been through the prison system in the UK. So I know I've been at the bottom of the ladder, and I know how difficult it is. That's why I can connect with the younger people. I understand what their situation is. And the young people, in general, I wouldn't say that this is the only thing that's on their mind. What's on their mind is football and music and, you know, and all the other sort of stuff. But there is an underbelly of resentment and anger amongst the younger generation, because now we live in a digital, technological world. In my time, you know, we used to hear about events that were going on around the world many, many years later. Now, these young people are finding out they are watching bombs dropping on Syria live on their phones. They don't need CNN or BBC anymore. On their social media network, they can see the bombs dropping. They can see the aid workers going into the house, pulling out dead babies, pulling out dead women and children, and hearing their screams and their cries. This is going to affect people. It affects people.
So, Shahid, what happens then? So we have a group of people who are marginalized, perhaps discriminated against in the job market. We're talking specifically again about the UK here. And then they see the impact of foreign wars on not just Muslim people. There are a lot of other ethnic minorities who are also affected by these wars, but they connect the two. What then happens? How do they then find out more information, or perhaps how does that conversation, does it happen amongst small groups? Is it more organized than that? What do you see on the ground?
Predominantly it's through social media. That is one of the best ways to get information. I mean, I've seen, on social media, people have shown me texts and information, a step-by-step guide on how to get to Syria. You know, I mean, I sometimes wonder, when I heard about these young girls from London who went to Syria and they were like about 17 or 18 years old, I was thinking to myself, how the hell did they even get to Syria? I would struggle to get there. How did these young girls from London, how did they actually get into a war zone? And then when you dig into it, they were actually groomed online by some, obviously some of these people from the extremist groups. And what I always say is that groups like ISIS, they spend hundreds of hours on one person. And we, in the field of the de-radicalization or countering all that, we spend 1 hour on 100 people. That's why we're losing the battle. The reason why we're losing the battle is because we have a lot of talk, but we have no substance. Because there's a lot of nepotism in this kind of, in the work that we're doing here. It's just people who know people who are friends. But as the gentleman on the stage said about ourselves, you know, looking at ourselves, are we fit for purpose? The people who claim to be dealing with these issues, are you fit for purpose? What is your qualification? What connection do you have with these people? Can you talk to them? Do you understand their language? Do you understand their culture? And I think that is very, very important.
Okay, so getting back to the drivers, discrimination, perhaps ongoing conflicts, how much of that is then turned into group affiliation? We're talking a little bit about online encrypted chat groups. How important are those kind of online groups in terms of the ongoing process of recruitment?
I think 95% of it is online. That's where it all happens. It all happens on Facebook. It happens on Telegram and WhatsApp and all this. This is where it's all going on. There is still some elements, obviously locally, where you might find some groups of people or individual people who have similar thoughts. But what normally happens is that it starts off with a grievance. People have a genuine grievance. And then and this is where, you know, I don't want to go into broaden it out too much, but for me as a Muslim, and I mean, I was born in Pakistan, so from the Pakistani community, the problem that we have is that when it's a cultural thing as well. When young people ask questions, we don't answer those questions. If somebody has a grievance, if a young person says, look, you know, why is America dropping the mother of all bombs on Afghanistan? Why did they do that? Somebody actually asked me that. Why did they drop such a massive bomb on Afghanistan? And I said, well, you need to ask the Americans, you know, why they did that. Because, you know, but these are the kind of questions they ask. I mean, I didn't actually say that. I said that in jest, but I did actually explain to the person what was going on here. But the point is that if we don't answer those questions, when they go to the masjids, when they speak to the imams, and they have these complicated Islamic-related questions, and the Islamic leaders and the community leaders don't answer those questions, then where they're going to go? Who are they going to ask those questions to? They're going to go to, as I call Sheikh Google, you know, or Mufti Google, or whatever you want to call him. And they're going to go online, and then they're going to get into these chat rooms, and they're going to get talking to these people who don't have a real answer. They have an agenda, and their agenda is to manipulate and groom these young people who have genuine concerns, but they're not getting the right answers. And one thing then leads to another. And as I was saying before as well, a lot of young people want to be the top dog. They want to be with the baddest gang. They want to be with the best group. They want to be with the winning team, with the best football team. And at the moment, unfortunately, due to the consistent media attention that the media gives, that groups like ISIS are the baddest group around. And these people want to join the baddest group because it gives them credibility. We need to stop giving groups like ISIS the oxygen. The media, which in my opinion is one of the most biggest radicalizers of all of the people out there. If they didn't show these videos, if they didn't mention groups like ISIS, just from the point of news, but not so much analysis and so much focus on them, it wouldn't be in the people's minds. I go to youth clubs in Birmingham, where I live, and sometimes the youth workers will come to me and they'll say, look, are you going to mention ISIS and extremism and all that? And I said, why? He said, look, these kids, they're not really interested in all of that. They don't really hear these kind of things. They're more interested. The bigger issue here for them is gangs, drugs, and criminality. And I hear what they're saying here. What they're saying is that by saying these things, by saying things like, oh, what do you think about ISIS? Have you ever thought about going to Syria? What you're doing is subconsciously, you're planting thoughts into their minds. These are young, impressionable children. We don't need to be talking about that. The bigger issue they've got is with gangs, drugs, and violence, because that's killing more of our youth, and that's causing more problems in our communities.
So if we pick up on that point about the gangs and the drugs, and we were talking earlier about the issue of also discrimination leading some people into some kind of criminal activity and ending up in prison. When young people end up in prison, there is a lot of dialogue at the moment about radicalization in prison. Now, you've been in prison. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience in prison and the role that if you saw any kind of radicalization in prison, and also what you're hearing now from the people who you work with about their experiences in prison?
I was in prison in the 90s. When I was there, I'd come back from Bosnia. It's a long story. I won't go into all the details. But what I found then was that because I was a religious person and I had a beard and I used to pray 5 times a day, the prison guards actually had a lot more respect for me. They actually gave me a lot of freedom, and I kind of almost became the unofficial Muslim chaplain of the prison, even though that wasn't my duty. I was there to serve a sentence. But because they saw that I was a person who was, not sort of getting involved in all the other sort of stuff, they kind of gave me a free reign of the prison, and I could go all around. And I found that, they actually respected me because I was a Muslim and because, I was, a principled person in the sense that I didn't do drugs and smoking and all that sort of stuff. Because what happens in prison, I don't want to go into all the details, people that have these privileged jobs are actually used as mules to move drugs and other stuff around the prison. But because I didn't do that, and when I was approached by the gangs in prison to do that, obviously I told them what they could do. I wasn't going to do it. That got me more respect. But now, what I found, when I speak to people who are in prison now, and quite a few of my friends are in prison and they've come out of prison, or people that I know or friends of friends, now there's a completely different atmosphere in prison. In prison now, in the UK, you have prison guards that specifically refer to your religion as a way to attack you. Because they realize that now, before they would just call you, they'd call you a paki, or they'd call you, some other derogative term. But now they actually use your religion as a way to rile you up, to get you to react, so they can beat you up, so they can put you into solitary confinement. Then what you find is that the young men who see this as an attack on their person, an attack on their religion, become defensive. And they say what they do is that they sort of become more overt in the way that they practice their religion as a way of fighting back against the authorities. And then the authorities start coming out with, there's a rise of extremism within the prisons, and that, Muslims need to this and Muslims that. It's not that. It's because you're attacking them. You're specifically pointing out and calling them names about their religion, and sometimes even saying derogative words and things about Islam, about our Prophet, peace be upon him, and things like that, to deliberately coax a reaction and then to do something and say, look, we told you, these people are extremists and they need to put in solitary confinement.
But Shahid, there is a link between criminality and imprisonment and joining extremist groups. So where is that happening? Where do you see that that's happening? Is there a connection there? Are we understanding the connection, or are we missing something there?
With groups like ISIS, definitely there is a connection between. I mean, I've spoken to many ISIS sympathizers, through my contacts and people that I know. I've had conversations with people who are in ISIS. But generally what I found in my own research is that a lot of the people that are, no, sorry, that's wrong. There are quite a few people that join the groups like ISIS that have a criminal background. And a lot of the times what you find when you dig into these people, they are sort of drug dealers, they are gang members, a lot of them are on the run from the police, a lot of them have a lot of issues with other gangs where they're being hunted down, where some of them have been sort of wanted by other gangs, there's hits been taken out on them. And what they do is, when you actually look at their backgrounds, 6 months ago, they were sitting in strip clubs, drinking champagne, and just living the life like everybody else. And all of a sudden, now he's an Islamic, a fighter for some organization. Well, you don't just transform from somebody who's been drinking alcohol and is living this kind of lifestyle, to all of a sudden being this person who's going to go and fight for the great jihad against the West. It doesn't happen like that. A lot of these guys are using religion as a veneer to justify their own criminal intent and their own sort of evil way of thinking. People always ask me the question, where did ISIS come from? Where were they created from? Well, if you look at the background of that, most of them came from Iraq, because of the vacuum that was created by the West when they illegally invaded Iraq, and they dismantled all the apparatus, and they dismantled the Ba'athist Party. Where did you think all the Ba'athist Party went? They didn't go to Hawaii for a holiday. They're still there.
So, Shahid, can we bring it back to the recruitment? And what is it that, for example, with the people who go through this process, and I know that the process varies and every person is very specific, but what would draw somebody to want to go and live somewhere like Raqqa, like the Islamic State? I mean, what is it about the pull of this as a lifestyle choice, really? Because not everybody goes there to fight. Some people go there to work, to provide professional roles, teaching, doctors, etc. What is it amongst the people that you speak to who are thinking of going? What is the pull?
Surprisingly, for people living in the West, they seem to think that if somebody actually wants to live a simple life, wants to get away from the commercialism and capitalism and all of this, that there must be something wrong with them. Inherently, maybe they're crazy, because people are falling over themselves to come to the West to live in this beautiful utopia society. Why would anybody want to leave us and go and live in a third world country? I know many people that went to Afghanistan who didn't go to fight, who went there to live because they just wanted to live a simple life. I know many people that went to Bosnia to live, because not to fight, because they just wanted to live a simple life. People go to Syria, not necessarily to fight. Some people have gone there because they just want to be a part of a wider Islamic movement, or they want to live in a situation where they feel that Islam is the predominant religion, where maybe slightly naively, in my opinion, they believe that groups like ISIS are actually implementing Sharia and are an Islamic State, because they're not. But people are naive. People fall into this trap. And sometimes when you actually look at these people who actually go over, when you look at their mental state, when you look at their social state, when you look at their family situation, they have issues. Some of these women that have gone over to live in these countries, they were abused by their husbands. They were not treated fairly by their families. And then you've got these online people, groomers, who then give them, respect, who talk to them in a nice way and say to them, sister, you come here, we will look after you, we will treat you like a queen, we will do this, we will do that, because we are Muslims, this is Sharia and everything. And they believe it, because the only Islam they saw from their husbands was a violent thing, that as if Islam justified a man beating his wife. That's the Islam that they saw. So that's why a lot of people, they fall into this trap that these guys are going to treat them better. But unfortunately, when they get there, they realize that they're not going to treat them better. And I know many families and many people who are trying to come back, but they can't, who have died in the process of trying to come back. And if they do come back to the UK, they'll be put into prison.
So are you saying the message of the brutality, especially towards women of the Islamic State, is not getting through, that people are not seeing the horrors of what the Islamic State is perpetuating against women, against minorities, against sometimes their own people? Is that message just not being seen by the people who the recruiters are trying to target?
Yeah, that is absolutely right. They're not seeing it, because the media, what do they show? They don't show us all of this. They show us a certain view of what they want us to see, to keep perpetuating this whole lies and nonsense, to keep the money coming in, because this is an industry. This is a massive money-making industry. The Islamophobia industry, the Muslim-bashing industry is a massive business. Now, you have to create a monster. If you don't have a monster, what are you justifying your funds for? So the media doesn't show all of this side of things, and people, if they because I'm in this field, it's my job, and I make it my job to find out what's actually going on the ground. But I'm one person with one voice. I'm not CNN or BBC or Al-Jazeera. But if the people actually knew the atrocities of what groups like ISIS do, the kind of brutality that they do, if they saw it for real, and if there was more of it on social media, if most people spoke about it, you would have less people be willing to go and join these barbarians, because that's exactly what they are. This is not a human being's actions. Human beings don't do these kind of things. These people have something mentally wrong with themselves. And what's frustrating for me is that they're using Islam, and they're tarnishing a beautiful religion like Islam with their barbarity. And that is a big problem, and people need to know. And I always advise anybody, when I'm talking to young people, don't even think about going to Syria. Don't even think about going to these places. It's way too complex for you to understand. You're not going to understand the complexities of what's going on there. And it's not what you think it is. Everybody is fighting everybody. You don't know who's fighting who. 1 minute this side, and 1 minute is that side. You've got so many international backers. You don't know who's who, what's what. You're wasting your time.
So Shahid, apart from also being a former foreign fighter, you've also been a recruiter. Now, from your perspective of having recruited people to go and become foreign fighters as well, what do you see as the best prevention tactic? I mean, how can you prevent people who might be talking about or thinking about going to join a group, not just Islamic State, any foreign fighting group? How do you prevent that?
What you find with recruiters, as you might have noticed, I'm quite, I'm being a bit calm at the moment. Yeah, but if I want to, I can get quite sort of, be a lot more charismatic and a bit more sort of, my hands can move around. But it's all about charisma. With recruiters, there's not much content, but it's more about the person and the individual. And that's how they normally catch. And young people are very impressionable and very easy to manipulate. And if you've got a nice story and you've got a bit of a personality and a character, it's very easy to do that. But what you find is, sorry, the question was...
prevention.
Prevention,
How do you prevent that?
Yeah.
How do you intercept? How do you step in at that point and try to stop that process? Although, of course, now, when you were doing recruiting, it was a much more personal face-to-face affair, which it still is in some parts of the world. But now you have to counter the online narratives as well. But what would you say? I mean, you work in this field. What would you say needs to be done better or needs to be done to prevent?
I always say that the work that I do as a practitioner is all I'm doing is damage limitation. I can tell you now, if you think that you can stop every single person going and doing something like this, you're wasting your time. You will never stop everybody. All we can do, who are in this field, is limit the damage and also deal with the aftermath of that damage. But the prevention stage, in my opinion, I think it needs to start at about at least the ages of sort of 10 onwards, at a secondary school level. We have a lot of programs for, sort of older kids like 16, 17, 18, 19 years old. But the young kids, I mean, before I came here, last week I was with a group of young kids about sort of 12 years old. And they don't actually understand what's going on. They don't understand the dynamics, but it's a very good age to talk to them about general things. It's about giving them positive role models. It's about showing them, different ways to channel their anger and their frustrations. And more importantly, it's about answering their questions and not dismissing them as just, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about, forget it. You have to engage with them, and you have to be able to answer those questions. Now, how you answer those questions is very important, because that will then change the direction of their life. They have genuine issues. The kids are saying, look, yeah, but, uncle, sometimes when, they call me uncle, which is quite weird, but, they say, oh, the guy down the road is selling drugs, and yesterday he came up to me and he said, look, you want to earn some money? And I said, well, how much are you going to pay me? He said, X amount. He said, what we're going to do is take this packet and give it over there. Now, these young kids are facing these dilemmas all the time, but they're susceptible. Now, it's not just about, sometimes with young people, you can't start talking to them about extremism and radicalization and ISIS. It's too complicated. You need to talk to them about things that they understand, like football and girls and music and whatever's going on in their crazy heads and social media. And then you use that as a platform then to build their trust. Once you build their trust and you show empathy towards them, that I get it, I understand, and then you take your time out, not just to sit on your high chair and dictate from the top, but you go and you chill out with them, you play with them, you take them on activities. I mean, I have a martial arts background, so I use that as my way of engaging with young people. I teach them self-defense and things like that, and that makes them interact with me, so they don't just see a scary monster with a big beard. They see a normal person who laughs and jokes like them, so they open up to me. And that's the only way that you're going to actually do any kind of prevention work, by bringing their guard down, by letting them feel that they can trust you. Just by delivering seminars and workshops to, hundreds, I've done it loads of times. I've had hundreds of kids in the audience and whatever. It doesn't mean anything. because he goes in here and he comes out the other side.
So,
it has to be
Shahid,
face to face.
what about the role of mosques and imams in this debate? I mean, what can be done at that level and what is being done? I know there are some pretty good projects in the UK at the moment.
Look, the mosques in Birmingham, I mean, you know, I don't want to, you know, look, they're doing their best. You know, there's a lot of issues, you know. I mean, I don't want to go into all the details, and I think there are going to be other speakers who are going to be talking about this maybe later on. But we have a lot of issues. We have a mosque system that is based on the elders and all love and respect for them. They did what they could when they came to these countries. They did their best. But unfortunately, they're not really equipped to deal with the modern day issues that we have. And I actually find a lot of them are an impediment to the work that we need to do. And that's not being disrespectful to them, and that's not saying that we need to push them out of the way. We want to work with them, but every time I try to approach them, they're very negative. You know, not all of them. You know, there are some good mosques in the UK who do engage and are realizing that we need to engage with the young people and realize that we need to do more, but they're restricted because they don't have the technical expertise, they don't have the governance, they don't understand safeguarding, they don't understand the issues, they don't have the people with the right tools and understanding to do that. A lot of these guys are just, you know, working class people who've been running the mosque, and they don't know how to actually engage. But it's changing slowly. We are getting a lot more young people involved, and you know, inshallah, it's gonna get better.
Okay, great. Now, we have been streaming this discussion on Facebook Live, so we have a couple of questions that have come in from Facebook users, and we also want to take some questions from the audience in a minute as well. So we have one question here that goes back to the prison systems, and it says, how do we engage the prison systems in this discussion?
Well, if we're talking about the UK, we are trying to do that. We have had some, you know, not myself, but people that I work with, different organizations, are trying to get some sort of access. But there seems to be a lot of bureaucracy and red tape. But I think eventually we probably will get some access into the prisons. I mean, I would love to go into the prisons and talk to people who might have these kind of views, you know, a general misunderstanding of Islam. It's not opening up yet, but I think it will open up. And it needs to be done, because that's a good way of nipping it in the bud before it becomes a bigger issue. And when you've got people in prison, having been there myself, you know, you have a lot of time to reflect, and you have a lot of time to ponder and think. And so if you can get some positive messaging to them at that stage when they're quite vulnerable in prison, it actually might be quite productive to sort of, because then they can spread that positivity around the prison, and when they come out, it helps with their rehabilitation as well.
Okay, we'll take another Facebook question, then I'll take some questions from the audience. What can parents do when they start to see that their son or their daughter have begun to talk about violence as a solution to the injustices that they're seeing in the world?
Well, for those of you who are parents, and all of you have been children of parents, did you listen to your parents when they told you to do anything? No. Yeah. So it's in our nature, as when you're a child, when you're kids, you know, some of us do listen to our parents. I definitely didn't. And, you know, it's just in our nature. Now, when you see your child, you know, sort of getting involved in gangs, yeah, and the parents see that, what do? They say to them, oh, don't do this, don't do that. And what does the kid do? He goes and does it more. Yeah, and he says to his parents, you don't understand, you don't know. The problem is that our parents, there is such a cultural distance between the parents and the kids. I'm not exactly an old man, but I'm not a young man either. I'm 52 years old. I've got 5 kids. And even I struggle to connect with my kids sometime as well. I mean, I had a few disadvantages because I was in prison for quite a long time. So my kids grew up without a father. But even when I came out, having to reconnect with my kids is difficult. When I look at other people out there as well, connecting and you know, with your children, it's not an easy job because there's no book on how to become a parent. But I think what parents need to do is they need to be more vigilant, and they need to be more understanding, and they need to educate themselves about what kids get up to. They can't just live in their own little cultural bubble and think that, well, it's like my parents used to send me to the mosque to go and learn to read the Quran when I was a kid, yeah? So as far as they've done their duty. They've told me to go to the mosque and I went to learn Quran. But what they didn't know, because they didn't follow up, is I used to go through this door and I used to come out the other door. And then I used to go and play with my mates. And they tell my mom and dad that I've been to the mosque. because they don't have a follow-through. Kids are very clever, as you know, when you were kids. So parents need to be more alert and more sort of on the ball and be a bit more sort of, not snooping, but be a bit more aware that kids can be quite cheeky and a handful.
Okay, we have one question here. Pakistan?
One is to Mr. Shahid Butt here. What made you de-radicalize here and leave the path that you had started out on? I'd just like to hear a little on that. Two, you've mentioned in all your work with children and older teenagers and all, there are different trigger points that you've enumerated over here. And you've said that most of these recruits are have a history of being involved with drug peddling. This, they, if I'm allowed to call them losers, don't have an identity, a purpose in life over here. But we've also seen recently recruits from around the world who are fairly more educated, more affluent, and yet we see leaving that cushy, comfortable life to go join extremist or terrorist organizations. So in all this, if we're looking at some evidence-based strategy here to see what are those 1, 2, 3 things that we need to prioritize at a country level, at the regional level, at the national level, what should those be? Thank you.
What made me come out of this field? I need to make a distinction first. First of all, I don't actually consider myself as an extremist. I don't believe that what I did in Bosnia was an act of extremism, because I helped my fellow Muslims, and I don't believe that that is an act of extremism. I believe that's an act of compassion and an act of humanity. So I wasn't an extremist. I've never been a terrorist. I've never gone and blown anything up. I've never done anything of that way. People may have perceived me in that way, but that's their opinion, and they're entitled to that. So as far as how I came out of it, I did have some crazy views. Yeah, I kind of went through a period. I was mixing with certain people. I mean, I grew up as a racist myself. I grew up hating white people, which was an extreme view. Because all my life as a young kid, all I ever heard white people call me was a Paki, and to F off back to where I came from. So I never had much of an opinion of them either. It's only when I started to practice as a Muslim and I realized that I can't be a racist. I can't judge people by the color of their skin. So my religion actually made me a better person and took me out of that. So my journey is slightly different in the sense that, sometimes people say that, oh, there was some kind of a defining fundamental thing that happened that brought them away from that. I think I just kind of gradually moved away from the physical side and kind of went more towards the talking and the academic side because of certain circumstances and my personal situation that I found myself in. And I think because I just found that having been around quite a few things and spoken to so many people, at the end of the day, what does it always come back to? It comes back to dialogue. I think, if you look at the situation of the IRA and Ireland, you had all these people, you had Martin McGuinness and Jerry Adams, who were, the #1 terrorists of the world, who had actually killed, murdered, sanctioned people to go and kill other people. And, there was a time in the 80s when, in the UK, you couldn't actually hear their voice in the media. You'd see their faces, their mouth would open, but Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister at the time, had told the media to cut his voice out because they didn't want to give him any kind of airtime. And those kind of people today are sitting in the House of Parliament in the UK. Martin McGuinness and Jerry Adams are MPs. And how did that all happen? It all happened through dialogue. And I think that's what, for me, I think what I've come to the conclusion of is that we have to talk. Yeah? But talking doesn't mean that you abandon your principles and that you abandon your beliefs. I find that a lot of people who are in this business or in this work, they seem to think that the less Muslim they are and the less, affiliation they have to their religion, that people will listen to them more. No. The more Muslim you are, the more religious you are, the more you stick to your principles, the more people will actually respect you.
Are you saying that when you had a truer understanding of your religion, rather than an understanding of your religion that you had growing up when you're perhaps ducking out the back of the mosque and not listening to anybody, so when you actually sat down to study your religion, that was a point in your life that made you think that, perhaps there was a different way to approach things?
That was a factor, yeah. I mean, you know, a lot of the times, from the Muslim perspective, I really wish that Muslims would read about their religion. I wish they would read the seerah of the Prophet, read about his lifestyle, read how he lived in Mecca and Medina, read how he treated Muslims and non-Muslims, and how he conducted himself, how he conducted his foreign policies, how he conducted his wars, the rules of engagement. If we actually read that, we would see that there is no real conflict here. You know, there is no real issue here. But that's where people, because of ignorance and not understanding, that's where the problem starts. So for me, in answering the question, it was a gradual process. And I feel that dialogue and conversation and working with the younger generation is probably, for me, was more productive than anything else. And the second question about, sorry.
You mentioned various triggers here, socioeconomic reasons and all, but you see more educated and affluent people now joining terrorist organizations. So what are those 2-3 priorities that we should work at national, global, international level to check and prevent extremism?
Okay. Just to use, you use the word loser, yeah? Just because you've got a degree in education doesn't mean you still can't be a loser, yeah? I'm not dismissing that, you know, there is this thing that before we used to say that, you know, it's just disenfranchised people, young people, because they've got no jobs and no prospects, they become suicide bombers. But now, as you said, you know, we've got middle class, we've got educated and all that. What that actually shows, and this is another misunderstanding that the general public have about what's going on here, there's a word called compassion. And it seems that it's as if this thing, compassion, is exclusive to the West, and that a Muslim or an Asian or somebody in another country can't have compassion for his fellow people around the world. 95% of the people that go to conflict zones, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Syria or anywhere else, from outside of the country, go for compassionate reasons. In their mind, they see that their people are suffering. Whether you think that they're deluded or they're misguided is a different thing. But in their mind, they see that people are suffering. They see these huge bombs dropping on their people. They see these children dying. They see these mothers screaming, and they feel compassion. And we now equate compassion to terrorism, that they must be terrorists because they want to go there. But what about all the white, British, English Christians that go to fight with the YPD against in Syria? What about all the white British Jews that go and fight with the IDF against the Palestinians and joining an army which under the United Nations is an illegal occupying force? Why are they not put into prison? Why are they not called terrorists? Why are they not called extremists? Is it only brown people can be called extremists? So if I go somewhere and if I have compassion to help my people, why would you assume that I'm a terrorist or I'm extreme? What's wrong with that? So yes, you're right. There is the basis is getting bigger. More people are there, but just because they're educated, they still have compassion. They still have feelings, and they have grievances, just like everybody else does.
Shahid, I've got another question here from Facebook. What are the warning signs that my teenager is starting to follow radical ideologies? Is there a warning sign? I mean, what do parents see, if anything?
Yeah, there's lots of warning signs, you know. He starts growing a beard. He starts praying 5 times a day. He starts reading the Quran and stuff like that. That's it, you know. He's showing signs of radicalization. You know, he needs to be locked up, sent to Guantanamo Bay. Look, you know, it's difficult because, look, what are the signs? I mean, he doesn't start growing horns out of his head, you know, or something like that. You know, it's like, ask a parent, do you know if your son's got a girlfriend? Or ask your daughter, do you know if your daughter's got a boyfriend? Yeah, they'll say no. Yeah, are you sure? Yeah. You know, ask your son, you know, does he drink alcohol or does he take drugs? My son, he never takes drugs. No way, he doesn't. Are you sure? Do you know? And in the same way, how can you sort of identify that your child is becoming? There's some obvious things. If the child comes home and goes that, look, you know, I want to go and join ISIS because I think they're the best thing since sliced bread. Obviously, that's an obvious one. But the kids are not going to tell you, are they, what they're thinking or what they're planning to do. It's a difficult one. It is a really difficult one. I don't really have a definite answer for that.
Okay, we can just take 2 more questions from the floor. Sri Lanka here.
Just Isn't a fundamental issue pertaining to radicalization in the Western countries for the immigrants who went to those countries they didn't integrate with the majority communities in those countries? How do you see that? And there's another question which it's what happens in most cases of extremism is that the silent majority is silent. And it has happened when Hitler came into power. It has happened in South Africa. It has happened in all over the world. And you're right. There's only like 1 or 2% of extremism coming from the Muslim community, but the vast majority of it, majority of them are silent. Just as it was the case in Sri Lanka when there was an ethnic war, the majority of the Tamils were not with the LTT, but they were silent. So how do you resolve that problem?
Well, on the first thing about integration, I'm glad you asked me that question, because in the UK, the Muslim community, in my opinion, is integrated. I was, as well as being in prison in the UK, I was also a prison in a country called Yemen, and I spent 5 years in prison in Yemen. Now, when I came back from prison, my whole city had changed, because before I left, I saw there was an influx of the Somali community that had come into my community. And before I left, there weren't that many Somalians there. And I remember I specifically went out to find out why they had come to live here in Birmingham. And I started talking to them, and I said, well, where do you guys come? Have you guys come from Somalia? They said, no. We were living in Sweden, in Norway, in Europe, basically. I said, so why did you come to Birmingham? They said that they felt that they were losing their identity when they were living in those countries. And they scoped out other countries, and they found that Britain, for Muslims, was probably one of the best places to live for a Muslim. And they found that, and they said that they found that Muslims were very well integrated into the system. We have politicians, we have MPs, we have councillors, we are in every facet of society. And they said that they found that fascinating, that as Muslims, as brown, as people from another country, that we were so integrated into the system, and they felt that this was a kind of society that they could bring their kids into and that they could live in. So I think that we are very well integrated in the UK. There may be some issues that we need to look at.
Yes, what I'm referring to is like, let's say if there's a football match in Paris, and then when they're playing the La Marseillaise, and then the Tunisian or the Moroccan communities booing at the national anthem. Same thing happens with the Sri Lankan community in Melbourne. There's a cricket match between Australia and Sri Lanka. All of the Sri Lankan community who are Australian citizens now are supporting Sri Lanka. So I think, if you're a citizen of that country, you should be, with that country. That's what I meant.
But the thing you see, when Pakistan play against England, I still support Pakistan. And so, I'm entitled to my opinion, So but you see, this has become, I think, an irrelevant point, because it's called the cricket test. Why are we even having a cricket test for? I thought we live in a country where we're free and it's a democracy. I can, freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Why should I conform to a specific thing?
Yeah, I support the West Indies, so I always have. Over here, one last question over here.
Hello, I'm from Commonwealth, a Youth Peace Ambassadors Network. Well, you talked about the role of the medias, informal and formal medias, how they are doing the negative advocacy, showing pictures and all. So how we can reverse the impact that already been done, and how to prevent the future impact of the medias, since we do not have any actual control over the medias, especially the mainstream medias. So we have control over the social medias, but what about the mainstream medias? How we can address this issue? Thank you.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we don't have access to Rupert Murdoch, and I'm not supposed to mention it. Sorry. Can you just scrub that out, please? I didn't say that. Yes, you're right. We don't have access to the mainstream media, and the mainstream media doesn't pick up on voices like myself and other people, and people like yourselves here who are working in this field. But what I think we can do is that we have to work on an individual level. And if you are an organization, you work on an organization level. If you have access to the policymakers, then you work in whatever aspect that you can. If I can influence the policymakers, then I will try to talk to them if they will listen to me. I am trying to do that in the UK. I am trying to, you know, sort of get to a position where I can influence, the policy makers. It's a long process. You know, I work with, you know, with the agencies in the UK. One of the, you know, the biggest agencies that is working on this is the Prevent strategy and the, you know, the whole counter-terrorism units and all that. Now, I have dialogues with them. I don't work for them, but I engage with them in conversation, and where I can work with them, I try to, because it has to come from all, you know, the different organizations, and we have to work in our own capacities, whatever we can do as individuals. And if that's just you as an individual on your street, talking to young kids outside your house and say to them, hey kids, come on, come over here, let's have a chat, or doing something, that's fine. If it's on a bigger scale like the United Nations or on governments, that's good as well. But the problem that I found is that there's a massive disconnect between the grassroots and the top. And it's bridging that gap is where I'm finding all the problems. If we can bridge that gap, and I try to be that bridge between the top level, I don't want to put top and low, between the two different areas. We have to bridge that. We have this problem with academia. We have all these academics who speak all these posh languages and all these big words that I can't even understand. And they're trying to talk about these issues. Well, then how do you think young people feel? How are they going to understand all of this? So we have to develop a bridge between that.
Shahid?
And we need to create alternative media ourselves and use social media to get these points across.
We need to start wrapping up, but as a representative of the media here who has...
Media.
I've spent sort of 7 years working for the BBC and then another 7 with Al-Jazeera, predominantly working in the Middle East. It's a very complicated issue, and I do think that the media, probably much like a lot of the representatives of our young parliamentarians in this room, is drawn from the elite. And I think the issue here is that we need to not just talk to our own, and we need to dig deeper, and we need to not be afraid or whatever of engaging with all groups of society. And certainly when I worked at Al Jazeera after leaving the BBC, that was a very sharp and swift change for me, to be able to access the grassroots level. And I think that's when, personally from my experience, Al Jazeera did their best work, and I'm aware that Al Jazeera has not always put its best face on, but when you get to the grassroots level and you engage locally, it's the best solution to getting good media coverage and probably good advocacy as well. Now, on that note, I'd like to ask you, you have a room full of young parliamentarians here, what's your advice to them in terms of engaging with the communities to prevent any kind of extremism or to make a better cultural understanding amongst groups?
Well, I think the first thing they need to do is take their suits off, take their ties off, put on a t-shirt, put on a pair of jeans, and then just walk around the street and just engage with the people and engage with the youth and just talk to them. And just talk to them, play with them, relate to them, and just be a normal person. Because when you do that, you will actually get a real life understanding about what's going on. And then you can take that back to the people that wear the suits and relay that message. And I have nothing against suits. I love wearing suits myself. It's just that it's too hot here to wear them. But then they can then relay that back to the people that make the decisions. Because I think that the young parliamentarians are actually the vehicle, the thing that's going to bring the connection between the street and the policy makers, because they are, I think, a very, very important factor in all of this. And so I hope that the people in power are going to listen to these people, because they have the best ability to understand what's going on. But you need to get your hands dirty. You've got to get into the mud, and you really got to, get down there and be sort of like them, and show them that you're a real person, show them that you understand, and show genuine empathy towards their issues and their causes and their grievances. And really, but don't do the classical thing, that when you then listen to them, you use them, you get to your position, and then don't forget them. And don't forget who put you in that position in the first place. And that is a problem that I find a lot with the people at the top level, is that they forget how they got there in the first place, and they lose track of their roots, and they disassociate themselves from their roots. And that's why nobody likes them, and that's why nobody likes politicians.
I can see that there are still...
Not all politicians.
Thank you.
There are still lots of questions in amongst the delegates, but I'm
Hello.
afraid we've run out of time. But you can speak to Shahid over lunch, or he'll be here. Oh, yeah, he was here for the next 2 days, so you can grab him. He's obviously very happy to talk. So there's one announcement over here, but if we could just thank Shahid briefly for his great insights.
Thank you very much. It's just a very logistical announcement. Thank you very much for